Tasha sat in the library, bent over her notebook, her dark eyes intently following the lines. The noise of school life still echoed in her mind, but inside her, there was silence. Today was one of those days when everything seemed particularly difficult. The teachers, Miss Thompson and Mr. Blake, were picking on her again, as if she wasn't a student, but a mistake in their class. The usual taunts, biting comments hiding their disdain, stirred her emotions once more. But the most painful thing was that it wasn't just the teacher's attitude. It swept across the class like a wave, making her classmates whisper and exchange glances. Tasha was smart, one of the best students. Her skills in mathematics, literature, and science always impressed those who truly noticed her. But unfortunately, not Miss Thompson or Mr. Blake. These two teachers seemed to do everything they could to suppress her desire for knowledge, to make her feel like she didn't belong. On one particularly tough day, Miss Thompson began the lesson by asking Tasha a question. "Miss Williams, do you know what this word means?" Her voice slithered through the classroom as her gaze settled on the dark-skinned girl. The class grew tense. Everyone knew where this was headed. Tasha sat in her seat, trying to gather her strength. She knew the answer perfectly well, but fear of humiliation held her back. "Say it, Tasha," her inner voice whispered. "Say the word." But before she could speak, Mr. Blake intervened. "I don't think she knows, Thompson. We're not expecting much from her, are we?" he sneered, casting a meaningful glance at Miss Thompson. The class fell silent, as if holding its breath. Some students chuckled under their breath. Others pretended not to hear. But Tasha felt it seep into every fiber of her being. She had endured this for years. But today, something was different, something deeper. Her father, the school principal, Mr. Williams, had no idea about her problems. She never wanted to use his position to ease her school life. She was used to fighting on her own. But fighting alone was unbearable. Her father, James Williams, was a man of principles. His life had been filled with many difficult moments when he faced racism, prejudice, and doubt about his abilities, especially when he began his career in education. He started as a simple teacher in a small town where his knowledge and experience were constantly questioned just because of his skin color. But Williams always believed that justice could be restored through education by building a fair and inclusive community. When he became the school principal, he intended to change things for students like his daughter. But he didn't know that the same injustice he once fought against was still oppressing his daughter. Tasha had never told her father about her troubles, knowing how much it would hurt him. But staying silent was becoming harder and harder. That day, when Mr. Blake made his usual comment, something inside Tasha snapped. Her patience ran out. She felt a mix of anger and pain and decided she couldn't stay silent any longer. Tasha came home and, for the first time, sat down across from her father, firmly intending to tell him the whole truth. "Dad," she began, her voice trembling, but her gaze was steady. "I need to tell you something." Mr. Williams looked up from his papers, surprised. He sensed that something was wrong, but he never thought it could be this serious. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" he asked, trying to stay calm. Tasha took a deep breath, gathering her courage, and told him everything. The taunts, the scornful comments, how the teachers had turned her classmates against her, how every day she felt like an outcast. She told him about all the humiliations that had piled up over the years. Mr. Williams listened in silence, his heart filled with pain and anger. How could he not have noticed? How could he have allowed his daughter to endure this for so long? But despite the storm of emotions, he remained calm. The next day, when Miss Thompson and Mr. Blake walked into the principal's office, they felt an unusual tension. Mr. Williams sat behind his massive desk, and next to him stood Tasha, calm and confident. The teachers' faces instantly darkened with fear and the realization that their behavior had finally been exposed. "We need to have a serious talk," the principal began, his voice cold but controlled. "Miss Thompson, Mr. Blake, do you know why you're here?" The teachers tried to defend themselves, bringing up their old, tired arguments about discipline and the curriculum. But Mr. Williams didn't let them finish. He presented them with reports, complaints from other students, and evidence of systematic humiliation and bias. But most importantly, he shared his daughter's experience. Miss Thompson tried to protest, but her voice trembled. Mr. Blake attempted to change the subject, but it was too late. They would be dealt with by the disciplinary board. Their careers were hanging by a thread. "Thank you for telling me, Tasha," he said quietly when she finished. "I promise this won't happen again." After this incident, a lot changed at the school. The issue of racism, which had been hidden beneath the surface, finally came to light. Other students began to speak about their experiences, and the school could no longer ignore the problem. Tasha watched these changes with a sense of pride. She knew that the fight was just beginning, but the first step had been taken. Her father supported her, and the school began taking concrete steps to create an inclusive and fair environment for all students. Teachers underwent cultural competence training, and new policies were implemented to prevent any form of discrimination. Students were no longer afraid to talk about their problems, knowing their voices would be heard. A few weeks passed, and Tasha was once again sitting in the library. But this time, she felt different. Now her confidence was real. She wasn't afraid to look ahead. She understood that sometimes, to change the world, you need to start with one step, with one voice deciding to speak up. This story isn't just about a school struggle. It's about justice, about how one stand can affect the system. Tasha knew that many challenges lay ahead, but now she was ready for them. After the confrontation with Miss Thompson and Mr. Blake, the school atmosphere gradually began to change. Tasha noticed that her classmates, who had once been silent bystanders or occasional participants in the cruelty, were starting to show a different side. Some of them, quietly at first, began to approach her with apologies or words of support. They admitted that they had followed the lead of the teachers and the group pressure, not fully understanding the impact it had on her. Tasha accepted their apologies, but she also knew that forgiveness was not the end of the matter. She wanted to see more than just apologies. She wanted to see real change, not just for herself, but for every student who had ever felt excluded, ridiculed, or underestimated because of who they were. Mr. Williams, too, became more vigilant. He didn't want to simply remove the problematic teachers from the system. He wanted to create a school environment where such incidents would never happen again. He initiated a series of meetings with parents, teachers, and students, encouraging open dialogue about the issues that had long been swept under the rug. The school board agreed to implement stricter policies against discrimination and bias, and workshops on diversity, empathy, and inclusion became a regular part of the curriculum. Tasha attended many of these workshops, sometimes as a listener, sometimes as a participant. At first, she was skeptical. Would these workshops really change anything? But over time, she saw how these conversations were helping students and teachers alike to see things from different perspectives. One day, during a workshop on implicit bias, a boy from her class, Jason, raised his hand. He had been one of those who had often laughed at the teacher's comments, never standing up for Tasha or anyone else. But now his voice was hesitant, unsure. I didn't realize how much it hurt, he said, his voice low but sincere. I thought it was just jokes, but now I see that it wasn't. I'm sorry, Tasha. The room fell silent as Jason spoke, and Tasha felt a wave of emotions wash over her. It wasn't just about Jason. It was about the realization that change was possible, even in those who had seemed the most indifferent. It's not about me anymore, she responded quietly, but with strength in her voice. It's about making sure no one else goes through this again. As weeks turned into months, the changes in the school became more noticeable. The teachers who had once been complacent started to show more awareness, more willingness to address the subtle, often hidden forms of bias that existed in their classrooms. New initiatives were introduced: mentorship programs, student-led discussions, and opportunities for students to learn about cultures and histories different from their own. Tasha, now more confident and more determined, became one of the leaders in these student groups. She helped organize events, brought in guest speakers, and facilitated conversations that helped bridge gaps between students of different backgrounds. Her experience had not only empowered her, but had given her the tools to empower others. One day, as she stood in front of a group of younger students talking about her experiences, she realized how far she had come. She wasn't just the quiet girl sitting in the back of the class anymore. She had found her voice, and with it, she was helping others find theirs too. Her father watched proudly as his daughter flourished, not just academically, but as a young leader. Mr. Williams knew that the road ahead would still be challenging. Systemic change was never easy, and there were always going to be setbacks. But now, with the support of the school community and the courage of students like Tasha, he believed that real progress was being made. As the school year drew to a close, Tasha reflected on everything that had happened. She had faced adversity, she had stood up to injustice, and she had come out stronger. But most importantly, she had shown that even one voice could make a difference. The school was not perfect, and there was still much work to be done. But Tasha was no longer afraid of the future. She had learned that standing up for herself and for others was the most powerful thing she could do. And with each new day, she was ready to continue that fight. When she finished speaking, the younger students applauded, and Tasha smiled, feeling the warmth of their support. She understood that every small step counted. Change wasn't instant, but it was happening, and she was part of it. Her father, who had always believed in her, looked on with pride. He saw in her the strength and resilience that would carry her far beyond the walls of this school. Mr. Williams, standing nearby, gave her a nod of approval. They both knew that the journey was far from over, but they were ready to face it together. Tasha's story became an inspiration for many, both within the school and outside of it. News of her bravery spread, and soon other schools were reaching out, asking how they too could create more inclusive and supportive environments for their students. Tasha was often invited to speak at different events, sharing her experience and helping others to find the courage to stand up for what was right. As she grew older, Tasha never forgot the lessons she had learned in that small school. She went on to pursue her dreams, knowing that the world still had its challenges, but also knowing that she had the power to make a difference. And with each new opportunity, she continued to advocate for those who, like her, had once felt voiceless. In the end, Tasha's story wasn't just about overcoming adversity. It was about finding strength in vulnerability, and about the power of standing together for a better, more just world. And as long as there were people willing to fight for that, she knew there was always hope.